Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for coming on a beautiful day to this event. I'm Barbara Zindroski. I'm running for mayor to change the city government to a city manager style, which is a council manager form of government. And I think Royalton could benefit so much by doing this. And they'll explain as they speak about their experiences. I'll let them introduce themselves individually and talk and go on to tell you how their own cities have benefited. I did hear back from the Huron Mayor who couldn't make it, and he just said he has full support that this is the best way to handle your city. I'd rather not talk about myself. You'll read about me in the paper. I can talk afterwards as well, or talk with you after 8 o'clock. I know the game starts at 8:30, so that's why I planned it this way. But I will hand this off to Andy White, who I work with in Huron, and I'll let him go on from there. And I'm just thrilled because we have Hudson, and we have Bedford and Norton coming and mentor. They came a distance to talk to you and to let you know the benefit of doing this. I just, again, after working with Andy White, it's an eye-opener. It's a whole different way that your city can operate so efficiently. Okay, thank you. I'll hand this over to Andy White.
Thank you, Barbara. Also wanted to thank my colleagues from the OCMA for turning around in pretty quick order to come here tonight and have some information. I've been a city manager since January of 2006, and I've been with the city of Huron that entire time. I originally from Boston, Massachusetts, where the form of government is a little bit more prevalent. I worked a lot in internships and management assistant type jobs growing up, and came to Ohio back in 2004 to be the assistant city manager of Huron. If you're not familiar with us, we're just about 45 minutes west of downtown Cleveland, most known probably for all the roller coasters at Cedar Point. So we have a lot of seasonality and a lot of different issues that maybe you don't have in North Royalton, but I think one of the common experiences that you can see, and you'll probably experience in conversation with the panel tonight, is that there's just continuity. I think from my perspective, obviously an advocate of the professional form of local government, I believe that the system is set up to perpetuate professional service. In strong mayor form of government, that's not to say you can't have the same thing. You can, and sometimes you very often do. But the mayor and I were talking on our way out here tonight, the difficulty in replacing someone who could have a long-term campaign as mayor for a series of terms. The individuals at the panel tonight from the professional side all have similar backgrounds in training. I have a master's degree in public administration with a focus on city management and finance and budgeting. I'm a credentialed manager, which is a status that you receive after having a certain level of experience and training. And it's a drive towards consistent management philosophy and management style. So I'd like to just say thank you to Barbara for the opportunity to attend tonight and have a conversation with all of you. And I'll turn it over to Trey for the rest of the panel.
Good evening. My name is Trey Hardy. I became the mayor of Huron about 2 months ago in July. So I don't have a lot of experience in the seat, but I have been on the council since 2009, so about 10 years. I've got a law degree. I'm working on a master's in public health. I don't practice law. I work at the health department in Erie County. And my position is, on this, we've had really good luck with Andy as a city manager. We've got 7 people that kind of keep checks and balances going on, and regardless of who you are, you can win a popularity contest to get into the mayor's position. But if you really want someone that's going to dig in and do the work that needs to happen on a day-to-day basis in your city, and you really got to do some due diligence. And I think as a council, that's what that was what happened when we hired Andy. We went out and had someone that we knew was going to be able to run the city. So he's not. I can tell you for sure he's not the most popular person in our town, but he does a really good job, and he's been probably one of our top city managers.
Hi, I'm Jane Howington. I'm the city manager for Hudson, Ohio. I've been there slightly over 5 years. I spent 12 years in Oxford, Ohio. Spent some time on the East Coast in Newport, Rhode Island, and also on the West Coast, or Midwest in Montana. One of the reasons that I had moved around a bit is the experiences from other regions and other environments helps me appreciate and solve some of the community problems. So as for instance, the water rights issues in Montana were actually very similar to solve those problems as they were in Newport when you had water rights on the ocean, on the beaches. So they seem to be totally different, but once you have some education and experience in city management and problem solving, you can start equating that from one region to another. I've been involved in this profession for 35 years, and still haven't tired of it. It's a learning experience. It's wonderful to work with people and get to know people and organizations and invest in the community. I did want to just, as I want to stay short on this, I want to read one passage because I know one of the questions is, should this be, if you were to do this, should it belong in the charter and so on. In Hudson, we do have all of this in the charter, and I think that this explains a lot. The city manager shall be chosen solely on the basis of professional qualifications and knowledge of the duties, standards, and accepted practices of the office. And I think that that's really a key towards city management. Not to say mayors are not very well qualified, but they may or may not have the profession and the experience and the networking in a city management form of government. So oftentimes, when we get into political issues, I see in my neighboring communities, a new mayor will come in and clean house for all the directors, or or put their political affiliation people in place. Maybe neither good nor bad, but it's not based solely on the professional qualifications and knowledge and duties that we would get. And we also, in Hudson, since we've had a manager form of government, we have a very, very long tenure of our staff. They don't turn over, they keep their the historical knowledge of the problems and solutions that have gone on, and that's incredibly valuable in turning that knowledge over in an organized way.
Good evening. Thank you for you all being here. I'm Robert Fowler. While I'm also a city administrator in Norton, I serve as the chairperson of the Ohio City Managers Support Profession Committee, which is how I got designated to be here. But aside from Mr. Reed, I probably have the most diverse experience of anyone sitting here. I've never been the sheriff, nor do I ever want to be. But before Norton, I was a safety service director in Lorraine and the director of administration in Worcester. So I have worked in statutory forms of government and charter. I am biased because I did work in a statutory form of government. There are a lot of benefits that we'll probably get into with some of your questions. But
thank you, Robert. Yes, I was been in government a long time. I started my career in the Bedford Police Department. I served in every capacity in the department, and I retired as chief of police in the year 2000. The city manager was leaving; he was retiring, and they offered me the job. I was there for 10 years as the city manager in the city of Bedford. Again, I think Jane explained it very, very well. Our charter is very similar to the charter that Hudson has. And then after 10 years, I was the sheriff of Cotton County for 4 years. Took over for Gerald McFall. Unfortunately, he was indicted. And then I became the sheriff for 4 years and served in that capacity. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. 1,100 employees. I would have probably stayed city manager for the rest of my career, but I said, you know what, why not finish in the largest sheriff's office in the state of Ohio, 1,100 employees in 6 or 7 different divisions. So it was a tremendous challenge, and those of you that stay familiar with what happened in Cuyahoga County, you can understand the challenge. Just one thing I'd like to comment about, I am certainly biased as well in reference to the city manager form of government. I think that there's a couple things that people say that the city manager isn't as responsive to the citizenry as maybe a strong mayor maybe. I think just the opposite. The city manager is so responsive to the 7, in my case, there were 7, 6 council and 1 president of council. I think you're very, very responsive to those individuals that have problems in their wards, or if they have a problem citywide. Not only are you responsive to that individual council person, but you also follow up with the individual constituency that made the complaint or made the inquiry. So I think there's even actually more sense of responsibility to the constituency than in a solely strong mayor form of government. And the continuity that's been talked about, I think is very, very important. We had a city manager form of government since 1932. We had department heads that were there for 30 years, police, fire chiefs, building, and so forth. There's no turnover. And with no turnover, I think you get more responsible government. You get more people who know what the needs are of the city. But that's my opinion. I believe it's the better. And actually, to end my side, it's 50% of governments in the United States are city manager form of governments. It's just not as popular in the Northeast Ohio as it is. Southern Ohio is a lot of city managers. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Ken Filipiak. I am currently the city manager in Metro Ohio. I similar background to some of my colleagues here, a master's in public administration. I have been a city manager in Ohio for 3 different communities now continuously for about 25 years. So I would agree with just about everything my colleagues here would say, and then add to that. Well, let me first also add that I'm currently the vice president for the Ohio City Managers Association, and I think all of us here are members of the International City County Management Association. That organization, ICMA, and the Ohio City Managers, OCMA, are bound by a very strict code of ethics that we all follow very closely. And among those is to remain politically neutral in the work that we do, and I think that's one of the most important points that we'll probably impress upon you here today. And while we were invited here by one of the candidates for mayor, we are certainly not here to support any one person or any position. Our job as professional managers is to provide the highest level of service. What you get in a city manager form of government is a little bit more like a corporate structure. You have an elected city council that act much like the board of directors would, and they hire a professional who is an expert, has expertise in professional training in public sector management. So as some of my colleagues here said, one of the most important things with that is the ability over time to take a long-term view, to develop a professional staff, to be able to have the benefit within the community of maintaining institutional knowledge that's been gained over the years, to strive for continuous improvement in providing those services, and leave the politics up to those elected council members. So what you'll hear from us here this evening is that what we do is we run the services of the government, and we do it as to the best of our ability and with the best people that we can find. And the goal of the elected council is to identify community priorities. They set the agenda, and then we find out is to implement it.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Andy to maybe, and the mayor, that'd be okay to kind of discuss how things operate here.
Sure. Very well. We have a very small staff and a lot of issues relative to budgetary changes at the state level. You all remember when the Kasich administration came into existence, we saw roughly $7 billion worth of state resources reallocated away from local government. And in that time frame, it forced a heavy hand with a lot of decisions that had to be made at the city level here and across the state as well. Examples of some of the innovative opportunities that came out of that conversation really were a lot of strive towards regionalism. In 2004, when I started with the city of Huron as an assistant, there were roughly almost a half dozen or so smaller dispatch centers within Erie County. By happenstance, in 2008, a lightning strike took out one of the communications towers and proved beyond a reasonable doubt that we could coordinate and partner. We worked with a smaller township, Margaret Township, which borders Zindroski to the west side, for a term of 30 days. Came on board to the city of Huron's dispatch network, and it worked out so well that they ended up eliminating the dispatch within their township, and within the next 3 to 5 years, all of the communities within Erie County coordinated with Erie County Sheriff's Office and established a new program. In Huron's case, that saved roughly $325,000 in its first full year of implementation, which was an awful lot. The dispatch is administered to the general fund within our city, and that $325,000 was sorely needed to address capital infrastructure that had been deferred over a period of time, and also to put towards economic and community development programming. That's one example of innovations we worked throughout this process. Additionally, Huron is a city which is incorporated out of Huron Township. There are several areas along our perimeter where there are 2 posted speed limits because the township's miles per hour is different than the city has. We had 2 different fire departments at one point in time. Back in 2009, we started towards a regional approach to fire suppression within our community. It made a lot of sense. We have a services agreement in place, and we operate 2 fire stations to address both communities. I think it was 2 years ago, we consolidated and added more manpower to the township facility and drastically cut into our response time. Over this same period of time, we've seen a significant reinvestment of shared and saved resources into our capital infrastructure. We have a small city footprint, but there's a good mix of industrial, residential, and commercial base, and we're on the river. In 2006, the city was able to acquire a 20-acre former industrial warehouse. It was Conagra facility. Had a 235,000 square foot warehouse, 36 concrete silos that are about 8 stories in height. We were able to work with the state of Ohio and acquire almost $10 million in the successive 5-year period to convert that. It houses today a state-of-the-art boat launch. It was about a $3 million project. We were able to finance that 100% with state and federal grants. The property was split in half, and the city took ownership of the 10 acres to the north, which housed all of the mess. We were successful in receiving a Clean Ohio Revitalization Fund grant, which is no longer in place, but there's similar type opportunities out there with Jobs Ohio. But we received $2 million for the remediation of that site, and today are preparing to entertain the development community for proposals on a clean site that's 3-side, surrounded by water. So I think it's been a pretty interesting run for us. There's a lot of things that we're working on right now, a lot of change within the community, which I think can be a difficult process to manage. I don't know if we're probably too far for you guys to see the lights, the light pollution. Rob, I don't know if you heard about that, but we were successful in recruiting a Canadian large-scale tomato producer in a greenhouse that uses artificial light to accelerate the growth pattern of their tomatoes. I think they have plans to develop a 100-acre site within the community. There are 3 greenhouses planned. The first one's already been constructed, but it sits on a footprint of a 24-acre building envelope. It's just enormous. Throughout that process, though, we had some hiccups with light pollution. Our ordinance requires them to have blackout curtains. So you, just like these curtains, there's no light can trespass because it's incredibly bright when they have a malfunction. We went through several, I don't know, Barbara, if you had seen any of that evidence back where you guys live, but it was pretty difficult to deal with, but we worked through the process. We sat down with all the community members and were able to create new regulations, and the problem has since been abated. But that was a $70 million project that we worked on. And then across the street, Huron had a corporate park. We just recently sold the remaining 25 acres to a private entity that received one of the large medical marijuana cultivation licenses, and also a processing plant and a retail dispensary. And that's been a lot. That's totaled about $100 million of new investment within the community, which has a residual impact with our property taxes that are going to the schools, and also generated a few hundred new jobs. And the city owns and operates its own electric utility, and we saw a great influx of new resources to support other options in the local government. You want to add anything?
Andy's touched on a lot of stuff, but basically, to kind of bring this full circle as the city manager versus mayor, we've been extremely aggressive with technology and development. In my personal opinion, watching everything unfold and working with some of the previous staff and administration is having someone with the knowledge and the education and the abilities to focus on what it takes to run a city. It's, we're small, 7,000 to 8,000 people. We balloon up in the summer for all the people coming in, but we've brought hundreds of millions of dollars in development into our community. We've leveraged grant money. What Andy didn't say is when we built the boat ramp, we used the boat ramp that we didn't pay for to get the loans or get the grant money to remediate the ConAgra facility. So in $25 or $30 million worth of investment that was brought to our community, I think we had less than a couple $100,000 invested in this. Having the city manager that's focused, he's keeping his eye on the ball all the time, has afforded that for us. We've been innovative. We've worked outside the box. We always come to the table and look at the finances first and say, how does this make sense? What are we going to do for the best interest of the country or for the community? We have not raised taxes. We're still at 1% income tax rate, and everyone else, all our surrounding communities are in that 2 range. We revamped our water plant. We're making water. We're selling it to surrounding communities, and we've been able to keep the cost down for the water. Amy mentioned the new power facility. We've got some innovative lighting things that we're doing, and it's I strongly believe it's because of having a dedicated professional in the city manager position has afforded us the ability to do all this. Mayors are great in bigger cities. They have a big staff. They can focus on all this stuff. But in communities like this, you've got basically one person that's kind of dictating policy, whereas you've got 7 people in our community that dictate policy and then work with Amy to go out and implement it.
Barbara, do you think it'd be fair for the panel to take some questions now? I know you had provided us with some information. Do you want us to address those questions?
That would be kind.
Sir?
I have my question would be the structure of your office. Who do you appoint? Who backs you up in situations like this? And who holds other structure? How is that formed?
It can be established within the charter documentation that was spoken to earlier. In the event, as I see it, if North Royalton's citizenry elected to a change to the structure of the government, The specifics that you're asking about would be enumerated within that document and then presented to the community before the staff would vote and then become law. Within the city of Huron, there are charter officers that I appoint but need the confirmation of the city council. We also operate a separate municipal court, which is a separate sovereign elected official. So we work with the judge for our municipal court. He hires his own individual staff. But the position of city manager, law director, and finance director go through the appointment process with city council's input. But as staff member, the only employee within the city of Huron that directly reports to the council would be the city manager.
Let me rephrase that a little bit. At whose pleasure does the chief of police and the chief of the fire, who do they serve? You?
The city manager in our form.
Many of the manager forms of government vary a little bit, but essentially the city manager is the chief executive officer, responsible for hiring and firing. Their boss is the board of directors or the city council. We usually will serve at their will, and they evaluate us, but they cannot fire the city finance director or the planning director. That would be the responsibility of the city manager. In different communities, some communities have the city council appointing the law director, the finance director, and the city manager. They're kind of the three legs of the stool. They kind of watch out for each other. There are some like Hudson that they appoint me and I appoint everybody else. So then all your full-time equivalents, part-times, and seasonals are appointed through the city manager's office. The city manager does all the labor negotiations and then brings proposed contracts back to council. So essentially council is the policy makers. They create the laws and provide the bumpers for the parameters in which we have to work within. And then we implement and carry out the duties and responsibilities.
Just one additional thing. Your question is specifically to police and fire. For example, in the city of Bedford, the city manager would appoint the fire chief and the police chief after a competitive examination. They're civil service covered. That means that the city manager, they're not actually an at-will employee. He appoints them, but they would have to be brought up on a certain type of a charge before the city manager could dismiss that police chief or that fire chief. So at least in the city of Bedford, they are not at-will employees. In the city of Bedford, close to what James is in the city of Hudson, it's a tripod. The city manager hires and fires everyone, except the law director and the finance director. They are appointed by the city council. So there's a separation of powers there. I can't tell the finance director, hey, go over budget or do whatever. He's independent, he's autonomous, he answers to council. I was very blessed to have a really good law director and finance director that we worked really well as a team on a $35 million budget. And you have to work as a team in those situations. So there really is a lot of checks and balances in the city manager form of government, but the city manager in most communities hires and fires most employees.
I think there's another important point to be made with that too, is that, and as we've all said, there are little variations in our city. For example, all positions are appointed by the city manager with the exception of the law director. So one of the things that is important, and I think is one of the goals of the structure of a council manager form of government, is the fact that the management team within your community is based on their professional merit. It's not based on favorites, it's not based on political will or something that may be in the air that perhaps undermines certain individuals that is politically motivated. So you have the opportunity in this type of government to be able to assemble a team that is based on their merits for fitness for those positions, not based on who may like them or who may dislike them, or what individual decisions they make or who those decisions might affect. It's based on their overall performance. In our city charter in the city of Mentor, it actually prohibits members of council from directly contacting city employees for that very reason, so that they aren't unduly influenced in the performance of their duties.
Are there any other questions before we? Yes.
Huron, you offered the number of people that your constituents, you had 8,000, I think. What are the other cities? How many constituents do you have in your cities?
It has approximately 22 to 23,000.
Norton is just over 12,000.
Bedford is 13,000.
Mentor is just under 50,000.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions before? One thing I think we have all mentioned, and I think it's important for you all to understand that any charter change requires a vote of the people. And prior to that vote, hopefully whoever initiates the amendment would have informational sessions, and I think every one of us would be committed to participating in those discussions and trying to help you be an informed electorate. The benefit of being a charter community is that the ultimate say is by the electors. So even if the North Royalton Council would put it on the ballot, it doesn't mean the change becomes effective. The ultimate vote lies with the people, and a majority of the electors would have to change the form of government in order for it to proceed. So while we talk about the charter and what benefits we have, there's a long process to get to this form of government, and the key would be to make sure that your electors are informed to make sure that it proceeds when they vote at the end of that election. Are there any other questions before I start with Andy or Alex? I'll start with Ken, and we'll go through our list of questions if anybody has them.
So I guess maybe we can just kind of throw out a few of our thoughts based on some of the questions that were proposed to us. The first of those is explain the significance of the city manager. And again, we've talked about the fact that the goal in this form of government is providing the best people possible to be able to run the services of your community. So what I think is really important to point out is that you still have, it's a very nice mix between political leadership and professional management. And there is no tension in that relationship. It's really entirely, when you hire a professional manager, you're hiring that person to implement an agenda that's being put into play by those elected officials. So the question really becomes, what's important to your community? And you have a city council that can then work toward spending all their time, quite frankly, on helping to identify those community priorities. For some communities, they may place a higher emphasis on economic development activities. For others, it might be cultivating the housing needs of the community or addressing public safety. Again, the benefits of this form of government is that whatever those priorities are, you have professional managers working all day long on those priorities. And they're not independent of that council leadership. Again, there's a balance here that's always struck. One of the advantages of the city manager form of government is that if that city manager is not realizing those goals or is not performing as expected, it's a lot easier to get rid of that person than it is a mayor. Mayors are elected, whether they do a good job or a bad job, they're going to fulfill that 4-year term in most cases. If your city manager is performing well, they might be with you for 10, 15, 20 years. If they're performing poorly, they might find themselves out the door with somebody else steering that ship in a much, much shorter period of time. So it really is a performance-based type of system. I think one of the benefits that is most important is that most of us take a much longer term view of that, of our goals as in our respective communities. It's looking at not just what we can accomplish next year, but looking at how you can, where you see the community 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, and assembling a team of people and assembling the resources and a strategic plan over a longer, much longer period of time that will be independent of those who are elected, but also modified along the way by those who are elected. So it's a give and take. Again, in our opinion, we would tell you that it really gives you the best of both worlds, because you still have that leadership within the community, but you have people who have dedicated their lives and their professional livelihoods to running, understanding, and implementing the best practices that are available for public sector management.
Just a few things. I can probably say this because I'm retired, and these gentlemen and ladies are not. But I think one of the main things that I found as 10 years as a city manager is at least I didn't have council people who were vying for the position of city manager, where I think you get a lot of the conflicts within city government at times when you have a mayor form of government, strong mayor, and you have council persons that are vying for that position. And because in a city manager form of government, for the most part, most council people don't believe that they're qualified to become the city manager. Now, I'm not saying on all. There's many that have master's degrees and so forth, and could probably qualify, but a lot of cities do not. So you don't have the conflict within council and the mayor's office as many smaller cities do. And I saw it many times as the chief of police, when I would go to chiefs of police meetings and I'd talk to my colleagues and I'd say, how's it going? And they go, constant fighting among the council people and the mayors. Now, hey, I'm not saying that healthy debate is not good in the caucuses of council, but when it would get to a position where they're fighting to get to the mayor's job or another job, I think it's counterproductive for the community, and the community certainly suffers for it. Lastly, on one of the issues I had is as Ken had said, council creates a vision. They have the goals and objectives of what the city, what they want to see done. For example, in the city of Bedford, they wanted a downtown. The downtown was there, but it was a mess. They wanted the utilities brought along in the backs of the businesses are buried, all new ornamental lighting and all of that. So, I mean, that's what they told us they wanted. We developed the budget for it. We implemented it within almost 2 years, a year and a half. And I'm proud to say about 6 months ago, Architectural Digest magazine made Bedford's downtown in the top 10 in the nation. As far as the looks and I contacted many of our department heads and said, congratulations, it wasn't just the city manager and council. But I think that's what Ken has said is absolutely crystal clear. They give you the objectives, and the city manager tries to achieve that.
I'm going to address two things. And one, I think we left this out. We're not good spokespersons for ourselves. I equate our position to a school board. Right? Do you elect the school superintendent? No, you appoint a school superintendent with that expertise to run your educational institution. Much like the city manager form of government, we're appointed by elected officials based on our educational background and our experience. So I think that might be a way to better understand exactly what and how the city management government operates. One of the questions that was presented was a salary for a manager. And it varies per location. And I don't think we can exactly pinpoint what one makes, but it varies. And I would say figure out what a department head in North Royalton makes, and a little bit of a significant higher bump than that, 5 to 10% more than that should be manager, at least to start. So I'll leave that to you, and I'll let, yes.
You're saying that he needs 5 to 10% more than the mayor?
No, then than your staff. Right? Would you want your fire chief making more than your manager? The fire chief and your staff, like fire chief, police chief, economic development director, staff level positions, the manager would make just a little bit more than that.
What about the mayor? What's the difference between the wage, the CM and for the manager? I mean, for the mayor.
So my mayor's wage is set by the charter, and it's, I think, $10,000 a year. It's a part-time position, much like elected officials. They're not receiving the full salary and benefits of an elected mayor.
And the city manager is a full-time job.
It is a full-time job. 24/7, some of it every
What do you think?
We make a variety. I mean, some of us,
I'll let you. Sure.
We just did a salary survey of some of the like communities, both with mayors, strong mayors, and with city managers. The mayors tended to make between 60 to 110, 115, depending on the size. Strong mayor, depending on the size. Strong mayors are full-time positions. Okay. So city managers tended to be between 110 and 160 to 170, depending on the size of the community and their tenure. Part-time, if you call them weak mayors, which often are either elected mayors independently or elected as through the council to run the meetings, will go usually between 10 and 20,000. It's usually a part-time job. And we have some city council members that make $60 a meeting, and some that make 10 to 12,000 a year. So those vary a little bit.
Huron is similar. We recently did a compensation study, being a smaller community. I think my position topped out at $115,000 per year, and that was done in concert with an outside specialist consulting firm. We took a look top to bottom for all of our various positions within the city. The mayor's salary and that of council is also set by the charter, and I believe it's at $9,000 per year. There is no division in Huron between the rest of council and the mayor. Trey gets to run all the meetings for no benefit. When council looked at the compensation, we hadn't addressed it, I don't think, as a community since 1997, so there was a significant deviation from a lot of our local partners. At that time, though, council made a determination that in our form, the mayor serves largely as the figurehead presiding officer over the meetings, and they wanted to keep it consistent across the board for everyone else.
I think sometimes there's a missed opportunity here to talk about it. When we talk about these things in compensation, often there's a comparison made to, I will tell you, I think most of us will tell you that city managers are full-time employees of the city. Depending on what your charter is, usually the difference between the council manager form of government and the strong mayor form of government is the fact that who is the chief executive officer. So that's really what we're talking about here. There are different forms, what we sometimes call the weak mayor form of government. You'll have a chief administrative officer, which will still vest certain decisions in the government with the mayor's office and leave a lot of the management decisions to that chief administrative officers. The more authority that's vested in that city manager's position tend to be a little bit on the higher side for salaries. But the point that I really want to make is that sometimes I think what gets lost in these conversations is looking at short-term issues like, well, we have a mayor now that works for $50,000 or $40,000, and we're going to hire a city manager for $140,000. Where's that $100,000 going to come from? Well, the answer to that is that if you look at any high-functioning organization, whether it's public or private, good management decisions, innovation within those organizations is going to drive a lot of your revenue. It's going to drive a lot of your cost savings. I can say with pretty good confidence that everybody at this dais up here has made decisions that have probably saved their community millions over the years. Whether that's Because one of the things that's I think critical to this discussion is that innovation drives a lot of what we do. That's what we're responsible for. So best practices are those things that you're trying to implement on an ongoing basis within your community. Because this is what we do as a profession, and like any other profession, your expertise lies in understanding what works, what doesn't work, what's working in other communities that you can borrow and implement here. Where can you find efficiency within your organization that can save your community money? How can you develop your economy to bring jobs to the community? You know, there are skill sets. This is a set of skills that all of us have worked our entire careers to develop and to bring on professional staff that are the best at this and who will want to work in an environment where they know that they are not subjected to the political will of one election cycle. So if you want to be among the best as a community, if you want to be the best, if you want to grow jobs, if you want the highest level of safety within your community, you're going to want to hire those people that are doing those jobs better than others. And they're going to gravitate toward communities where they have some level of personal security, knowing that their job performance is what is going to drive their ongoing employment, and not necessarily one election cycle.
As city manager, when I left in 2009, I was making $115,000 a year. I became the county sheriff at $102,000 a year. So I took a $13,000 cut in pay to become the county the county sheriff. But I believe it was for all the right reasons. And Ken is absolutely right. I think you get the best people for different positions within when you advertise for different types of jobs. You get better people, I believe, because they know that there's going to be continuity in government. It's not going to change every 4 years. Just a thought.
Yes, sir.
I likewise apologize, this may have been covered, but how is the whole process of changing the form of government in the community initiated? I assume that some mayoral candidates might be in favor of it, some not. Is it totally dependent on the people or
So,
petition for it?
and I apologize for my ignorance for not knowing, one, if North Royalton has a charter, I believe you are, two, and how that charter outlines how changes occur. Typically, they're outlined in two ways. One, citizen-driven, meaning that a group of citizens could circulate a petition, collect the appropriate number of signatures. In my case, it would be 10% of the last general election, which would have been the state election, which would be, I think it's over 520 signatures. They have to be certified, meaning they have to be electors in North Royalton. Make sure that's clear. And once that is certified at the Board of Elections, then a vote will proceed. Secondly, the City Council typically can, in accordance with the charter, typically it's a 5/8 majority, put a charter change on the ballot. That's two. And they would have a vote saying that they wanted to put this forth. And then thirdly, typically you have a charter commission, review commission, that meets, typically it's every 5 years, sometimes it's every 10. Again, that'll be outlined in your charter. And then they review the forms of government. You may be familiar, Cleveland Heights recently went through this process. They went through a charter review. The charter review recommended maintaining the city manager form of government. There was a group of citizens who feel differently, one of which was a state representative, another one is an elected county councilman, who were driving the vote for a strong mayor form of government. So they did a petition and got it certified at the Board of Elections, and now that vote will happen come November 5th. So those are three ways. You can transition. The city of Hilliard recently transitioned from a full-time mayor to a city manager, and I believe that transition takes place at the end of this year. Now again, I'm not sure of your charter, but once a person is elected, typically they fulfill that term. So if that term is for 4 years, they should fulfill that term, and then you would look to change the form of government at the next election. But those are 3 ways, typically, that charters are changed.
The short answer on that is that people always decide what the government form is going to be. You may have some modification of your existing charter. That charter review commission, which is made up of residents who get appointed typically by the city council that exists now, and they come up with whatever changes they would like to make. They might present those on the ballot in one lump sum. They might present them in different issues on that ballot, and the voters go and they decide if you want to change it or not change it.
And ultimately, the voter has the say. The voter always has an opportunity to affirm or deny those charter changes, which is why I think charter form of government is the absolute best form of government in this state. We don't want people in Columbus telling us how to operate our local government.
Voting for the change of government being a general election or
I believe that's up to your charter. I know our charter indicates it cannot be at a special. Any charter changes has to be at a primary or at a general election. Doesn't mean that it can't happen, but again, it's outlined in our charter, so I apologize. I should have freshened up on the North Royalton charter. This gentleman had.
I have a question for your Since you have a city manager and a mayor, who's running the city?
On the day-to-day operations, the city manager,
What is the mayor?
the mayor basically drives the conversation on policy, sets the agenda for all the legislation, all the priorities that we'll be working on a day-to-day. Typically, the mayor does a little more legwork than a normal council person. We meet several more times during the week to go over the agenda. We meet probably similar to North Royalton twice a month. And our city council meetings are held on Tuesdays, the 2nd and 4th of each month. Typically that Thursday prior to, the mayor will come in, we sit down and go over the agenda, make sure that everything's on track, and put out the packet for council's review on Friday afternoon, so they have the weekend to look through everything. But essentially, that's an hour and a half meeting. But the legwork goes out of my office down to the department level, where a lot of issues are established and then move up the chain of command. I try to facilitate the policy priorities that city council's identified, and then we put in the legwork to produce the legislation and review contracts for legal, budgetary review, all of the items that you would want to consider as a citizen prior to a policy decision being implemented as a resolution or an ordinance. Have gone through a rigorous process before the mayor and council make that final decision. But in Huron, the day-to-day, you may have spot meetings during the week with a variety of council persons, but it's the individual employees of the city in my office and all the other departments that are running the day-to-day.
Nothing gets done in Huron without the majority of the 7 council members. We will ask staff and Andy, or direct staff and Andy, to bring us something, some type of legislation. I will say this again, in this structure, the amount of detail that we get and the amount of information that we get back to make an educated decision is great. Then it comes back to us, we discuss it. Sometimes we do 3 meetings before we'll vote on it, sometimes we vote on it after 1 reading. But by the time it's hit us, we have a very good understanding of what are the variables within the legislation. And Andy, to his credit, and his staff, they've gone above and beyond to make sure that every item, every article, or every instance has been addressed that we could think of, so that we could make an educated vote at the council level.
I think too, just to emphasize what's been kind of indirectly spoken about, I share the perspective that the council manager form brings in qualified individuals. We've just had 3 positions open, and we were able to attract very significant caliber of employees. And any decent manager is going to be supported by staff, and there's so much that goes on at the different departmental that one person can't really be expected to produce all that. It's the coordination from the city manager's office to the legislative body that gets kind of all the glory. But I think everyone here would agree that your staff is critical, and who you're able to appoint to the positions that are actually running the various departments of the city is of significant importance.
I have a question. On our Facebook page, we got a post about Cleveland Heights. In fact, there's a lot of talk in North Royalton about Cleveland Heights are getting rid of their city manager. And a lady writes back on our post there. She says, now I control, she says, Cleveland Heights used to have their own water department. We are now paying $1 million debt because Cleveland Heights water bill and 2 sewer bills. Apparently, these rates are going to increase beginning in February. Just one example, and so forth. So, what's the story with Cleveland Heights? I watched a video on YouTube about the city manager, and she talked in 2013 having problems of debt, not enough income coming in, equipment problems, and things like that, as she walked into the done.
If you recall, I kind of discussed this prior. A citizen-driven initiative was pushed by 2 select individuals. One is a current county council person, and one was a previous state representative, who feels that an elected chief executive is their course of action. However, the Charter Review Commission came back with a finding that the city manager form of government was a better form of government. But because the citizen-driven initiative collected enough signatures, was certified to the ballot, that's what's on the ballot. It has not changed yet. There's a vote coming November 5th in order to change. It hasn't changed the form of government. An affirmative vote for that change requires 1 plus 50% in order for that to change. So that is a citizen-driven initiative to change the form of government.
Right, so how's it working out with Cleveland Heights as far as financially? Are you familiar with that situation?
I can't speak to the issues of Cleveland Heights or to what has driven a citizen petition. I would say only one thing, that when elected officials are pushing an initiative, it begs the question of what are their motives.
Let me also say in response to that, and I don't know the individual thing of things that went on in Cleveland Heights, but remember with the form of government, a city manager cannot go and spend money and do things without approval of the council. So council sets the policies. The city manager will bring a proposed agenda, a budget to them to fulfill those policies. The council will approve that. So if there's a problem with expenditures and the lack of economic development and revenue stream, oftentimes it's convenient to say that the city manager is the scapegoat. But the council is the one that's responsible for guiding and leading the policy and approving those expenditures. It's really a team effort. There's only so much that any of us can do without the authority of council. For instance, in my city, I have the authority to spend up to $25,000 on something without going to council. Now, I don't always, but I can. But anything over $25,000, I can't do anything about until council has approved it. So there's, again, that check and balance there that once you get into a political situation where you have a citizen-initiated petition and the Charter Commission that recommended, you've got 2 sides, and they're going to take whatever angle they can take to justify or legitimize their side. So it is really important, and appreciate your questions, and while we can't answer specifically for Cleveland Heights, it is important to get the facts and really find out what went on rather than just taking A or B word for it.
Yeah, I think Jay did a very good job of making that point. One thing I'll add to that is, because it's very critical, I said something earlier, which was that there's an important balance that has to take place between the city manager and the elected leadership. And that political leadership matters greatly, as you pointed out. Your elected leaders, as you would expect, who are supposed to be listening to the electorate, they are the ones that set that direction. That direction may not be what's best for the community in the long run, but it's the city manager's job to implement it to the best of their ability. Now, our job will always be to run the government services as best as possible, but if there's a lack of resources, if there's a lack of discretion allowed for us to carry forward that mission, it may not be possible to realize it. It may be that there's no unity on that council, and that's another very difficult position to overcome. I think a lot of us are very fortunate to have high-functioning city councils that work well together, and they have a vision, and when that council is able to set that vision, it makes our job a lot easier. I'll say this too, and I'm not suggesting in any way that this is the situation with Cleveland Heights, because none of us can really evaluate that on any serious level here, but sometimes you may not get a good city manager, but the nice part about this is that you can always make that change, and you can make that change quickly. If you get a bad mayor, you're waiting out the next 4 years.
If you get an opportunity also, you can Google East Cleveland. East Cleveland had a city manager form of government back in the 1970s, and it was a very, very well-run city. I can't remember that. It's not I think Wheeler was the last city manager that they had there, but it was a very well-run city. The chief of police was a friend of mine, even though I was a kid back then. But it was really well run. I'm not going to. You do the research and take a look at what happened after they went to a mayor form of government over the following 3 decades, and you get your own conclusion.
Question is now.
Some of the issues in Cleveland Heights a little bit better. I almost went to work there in 2013, but for a host of different reasons, I decided not to. But I did at the time do a lot of research, and I think in any of our communities, when there's underlying inefficiencies, it's I think unfair to put that on the lap of one person. These issues are systemic, and sometimes they're generational. And I think in addition to what happened with the change of government in East Cleveland, look what happened to the whole part of the city in the success of 30 years, and the housing stock, and these problems are elemental, they're multifaceted, they're very difficult to address, and I know that Cleveland Heights had dealt with some of that same type of downturn. I don't know that changing the form of government is going to benefit that, but I think the question to ponder would be if there are systemic problems, if there are generational issues that are ongoing within any community, should that priority be implemented by a professionally trained manager, or left up to the potential of an election result that's going to have definitive impact, and that's what you get stated for that full 4-year term. But I think it's important to note that a lot of the issues that are potentially affecting any community didn't start with one person's appointment. And that I think is true with what's gone on in the region of Cleveland and water and sewer. There's very difficult, it's expensive. I mean, even at the local level, to invest $4.5 million as we did in the city of Huron to serve one electric customer is a 30-year obligation. When we went through and did the due diligence, it's paid for itself within the first 7 years on an asset that has a 60-year shelf life. But we're not going to see that benefit immediately. It's going to take a decade. And I think it's important to consider the time frame with which these systemic issues have to be resolved.
Question.
I have a question. Can each of you address your backgrounds and what qualified you to become the city manager of each of your respective cities?
So I started out as a regional planner. I have a master's degree in urban and regional planning. I have a second master's degree in public administration and postgraduate work in political science. I started out as a land use planner and worked my way through the various levels of government to take on longer range and solve larger, complex issues than just land use. So it was a stepping stone up. I was at one point community development director in Oxford, Ohio, and I don't know if I could say ascended or got demoted to the city manager. But the familiarity with the community, the familiarity with the form of government, my work experience in the past, gave me that proven track record that they wanted an innovative person that could reach out and communicate with the community. So that's my background.
Similarly, my first job, I was a park and rec counselor when I was 16. I went and received my master's degree in public administration with a concentration in city management, finance, and budgeting. I did an internship at the graduate level. In my undergraduate days, I had the benefit of working in a town outside of Boston for a summer in the town administrator's office. Subsequent to my time in New York during graduate school, I was able to secure employment in a nice community outside of Hartford. I did that for about a year when I was hired as the assistant city manager in Huron. And then when the manager who hired me retired his position, I was ultimately selected from a competitive process to be a successor.
So I took a non-traditional route. I did say Bob and I have a lot of common, but somewhat. I was a career firefighter, and while I was working at the fire station, decided to gather an education, got my undergrad, and subsequently decided that I was not fulfilling my educational need. So I graduated from Cleveland State with my MBA. Took a job at a small community in Southeast Ohio as an administrator, and then went to the city of Worcester and Moraine, and then here I am today.
I went to Cleveland State University. I got my bachelor's degree in business administration and labor and industrial relations. And then I joined the police department to the woo of my wife over here. I thought you were going to be a manager. But in any case, became a sergeant. I was a patrolman, detective, sergeant, lieutenant, and then I was chief of police for 11 years. And actually, they appointed me city manager without looking at any other candidate. So I guess it was reflective on my management style with the police department, and I became city manager for 10 years.
So my experience is probably just a little bit more traditional. Again, different pathways into that position. I had received an undergraduate degree from Georgetown University in government. Then, as I was working in nonprofit management, primarily in the transportation area, then worked in county government. I was pursuing my master's in public administration, which I received, and then I became chief administrative officer in a community of about 15 to 20,000 here in Ohio. I was there for 5 years, moved out to a community, a larger community, as their manager, city manager, of about 25,000, and then was hired by the city of Mentor about 10 years ago now, which is a community of 50,000. So when I say traditional, that's not an unusual path for city managers to sort of look to move up in size in a community, and that was my path.
When a change is an issue to like populace, does that usually mean that they have candidates in mind?
I would say it almost never does. Yeah.
Well, when you do it, then
Sure. If your community, if this community or any community that decides that it wants to change its form of government to a city manager form, typically what would happen, and this can happen in different ways, either that community directly, but it's become, I think, a little bit more common today to have a professional management organization that comes in and helps you do a job search. I think Northeast Ohio, working here in Northeast Ohio, from those communities that have the city manager form of government, most of those searches tend to be national searches. I might be a little bit unusual in that fact. I worked exclusively in Ohio, but you've heard some of the others on this panel tell you that they've come from other states and different communities around. So usually these job searches, though, are pretty broad and pretty rigorous process. And the process itself isn't always necessarily limited to just city council. It's not unusual for city manager candidates to be introduced at public meetings for consideration and for interaction with some of the people that they would be working with at the department level or even with the residents in general.
I'll just speak, kind of piggyback on Ken's comments. I've been in searches where we had a public forum, where it was a reception with all the candidates, which is a little bit strange of 7 candidates who are all meeting the same people. And then you would have a tour with the department heads, and actually your department heads were actually interviewing you, as well as council. So, I mean, the process can vary, but a lot of people are now inviting that public input as a part of their process. So, question, thank you.
And I apologize, I came in late, but a couple of questions. You keep saying that this manager will be professionally trained. Who's going to train them? What's the cost of that going to be to the city? If we have to bring in a search company, what's the cost of that? I use search companies in my business, and who funds that? And then, you might have just discussed this before I came in, but if we go to a regional type government, then is there still a mayor? And if so, what is the role of that mayor?
No, we're okay. So I think to your question, what is the training?
Motion, Senator Barb.
Energy efficiency. The training is through your educational background and experience, like in our charters, many of the charters, and I think Jane would be happy, Ms. Hamilton here, would be happy for you to be able to read her charter. It articulates the requirements for the position. Many of them require 5 to 7 years of experience at an executive level in a government. Many of them at an assistant or at a city manager level. So when you ask about training, they should come already trained. That should be articulated in your charter. Again, all these things should be out. If you're going to push a charter amendment, you should articulate these so there's no ambiguity. We want to make sure that when the charter initiative is pushed, that it's clearly articulated. Secondly, you asked about search firms. There's a variety of search firms in the public realm. Some will do it for very little. Some will do it for a lot, depending on.
Define very little.
Some will do it for under 5,000.
Okay.
Just depending on, again, typically there's an RFQ or request for qualifications process that would be initiated by the council. They would review those firms and then select the best firm based on their experience, etc. And then they would subsequently negotiate a contract with that firm to start the search. They take care of the advertising, they take care of the initial selection. Typically what happens is the council will meet with that individual firm, say we're looking for a person with a master's degree, and then they'll identify specific criteria that maybe are impacting like North Royalton. Infrastructure issues, somebody with current background in infrastructure issues, etc. And then they would weed out the first applicants and give the pool of candidates, maybe there's 30, to the council to subsequently pick and rank their firm. And then there was one other question, I apologize.
Is there still a mayor involved with this type of government? And if so, what is that person's role then?
I'm going to defer to this mayor because we have one here, but typically the mayor is a ceremonial. He does participate as a member of the elected body, but I will defer to him.
Okay, thanks.
Well, unfortunately, we haven't done it. So here Andy's been there since I was on the council. I think what happened when the previous city manager left, we had council input. We had a committee set up. I don't think we used an outside firm because we had someone that was already kind of in the position, and we had done our research and we had done the due diligence with the previous city manager. So we kind of selected Andy prior to him becoming the mayor or the city manager, but he can probably shed a little more light on that process because again, when he came in, I was not around.
There was a competitive field. I applied kind of as a long shot. I think I might have mentioned to some of the panel beforehand. I moved to Huron from the New England area, that's where my family's from, and took the position under the guise that I would be groomed potentially for an executive experience, as the manager that hired me was getting ready for retirement in 3 to 5 years. So I left everything that I know in the East Coast at 20-something years old at the time, and moved to Ohio. And then 8 months into my tenure, Mike at the time told me he was going to retire. So that kind of threw a curveball at me. But I helped work with council to facilitate a competitive recruitment with the intent to run for the position to try to get it, and was ultimately successful. On the day-to-day, I think you would ask a question on what's the mayor's role in our form of government. Is ceremonial, to preside over the meetings and to help set the agenda, but it's a part-time position in Huron as opposed to a strong mayor form of government where it's basically a full-time position.
If I could kind of add to that, there's if you're a small community that does not have an HR department or a full-time professional HR function, you probably want to be more inclined to use a search firm because they know all the rules and the guidelines and what they need to do, how the ads go, and so on. In some communities that have HR professionals, the HR professionals will do all the processing of putting the ad in, but the search company will help maybe develop that and develop the questionnaire. So, for instance, with Hudson, they hired a search firm. I think it was about $20,000. The search firm interviewed all of the staff, meaning the department heads and the council, to get kind of an idea of what they wanted, and then put this questionnaire together. But there was an HR staff person that did all of the advertising and the copying paperwork and making sure that the council went through the resumes that came in and so on. Then there's, in Newport, Rhode Island, for instance, they have a whole department. They're much bigger. They have a department for human resources, and they did all of their recruitment in-house without it. So it varies depending on what expertise you have, what your budget is, and what your interests are, and whether you have internal candidates. Some communities that have internal candidates will just shop that internal candidate through the organization, and some will want to do a national search so that that internal candidate will be able to prove themselves. It just depends on the tenure of that person, the background, whether they've been groomed for the position or not.
Any other questions?
Has this come from a background, obviously you all are experienced in this field, from communities that didn't do their part and you felt you needed to spread out in order to get things done? Or what was the whole reason that the council management came into being in your community? Specifically,
I'll start with mine. Mine was charter initiative, so it was a village, and an administrator, and then they transitioned. If you're an unchartered village, when you transition to a city, when you get over that 5,000 threshold, there are significant difficulties, so they essentially adopted the village form.
So it's very helpful.
Mine is pretty simple. 1932, they started the city manager form of government, and we've had a city manager ever since that time. For the most part, it started because Bedford was split up. The Bedford Township then was 4 or 5 different communities, actually 6, and then it was split up into separate cities, Maple Heights, Bedford Heights, and so forth. So at that point in time is when they decided to go with the city manager form of government. So that was 70, 80 years ago. So we've had it since a long time.
The City of Mentor has always been a council manager form of government since its beginnings. The city itself became a city when it merged with a township between the village of Mentor and an adjacent township just over 50 years ago. But even the village of Mentor was a council manager form of government, and you probably have as deep of a tradition for that than any of the communities in Northeast Ohio, because about 10 years ago, there was a charter change in our community that actually eliminated the mayor even in the ceremonial role. The president of council fulfills exactly those same responsibilities, but our population, our electorate, decided that they wanted to avoid confusion actually between what those roles were. So again, a lot of times it's just traditions in community and what works. I think that's one of the things that's important to mention too, statistically speaking, and not just in Ohio, but across the nation. If you look at community successes, and they measure those in different ways in terms of safest communities, communities that are successful on an economic level, generally speaking, council manager governments perform a little better.
The village of Hudson and the township of Hudson merged 20 years ago. The village had a village administrator, so there was some experience with having some sort of a professional CEO in the village with a much larger area. They felt they wanted to go, and the charter examined that and went with the city manager. So with transition. Now, some of the things that we didn't really talk about here yet was the transition. Say, if you get in our case, I'll use our case. So the citizens voted in both the village and the township. They voted to merge. The merger created a merger committee, and there was a temporary council of government, for lack of a better word, representatives from the village and representatives from the township that had temporary operational control. Well, a charters committee was formed and went through all the details of the charter. And that outlined how many council people would be there, is there a mayor and a president? We have both right now, and it is confusing. All of which committees are going to be developed by charter, and which ones are advisory, and then all of that went back to the vote, the electorate, to get voted on again, and then people filed petitions for election in the ward council seats and the at-large council seats. And now we have, every 5 years, we have a charter commission that's appointed by council. They review this, citizens can provide input, and any of those changes go back to the electorate to be voted on.
Huron, similarly, by demographic population, when the city became, well, I should say when the township determined to incorporate part of itself into a village, it created a charter. Huron saw an influx of resources from the Northeast in New England, particularly in the automotive industry. And Huron became somewhat of a veteran community, a lot of neighborhood development, and at that time, there was a push to create the council manager form, and it's been that ever since. And to echo what Ken had mentioned too, the U.S. News and World Report, just had it in front of me, they published an article on the healthiest 10 communities in the United States, and 7 of the 10 are all council manager forms of government. And you can find that information through the ICMA. I provided some of Zindroski for further reading. There's a wealth of information that's available out there on reams of data and statistics that demonstrate what's been talked about tonight. Any other questions? Okay, no. Sir?
What control over positions do you have in terms of appointment, and who can you fire? Can you fire the police chief or the fire chief?
Touched on it a bit ago. Essentially, it comes down to whatever the establishing document comes up with, the charter. So, in the event that North Royalton elected to go down the path, become a council-managed form of government, there would be a process. It would go out to the voters. We would establish what specific authority that the manager would have. In Huron, the city council confirms the appointment of the law director and the finance director and the city manager. The city manager hires the rest of the staff, including the fire chief and the police chief and the different department heads.
I would also say that I believe that your police and fire chiefs are civil service. And due to the fact that they are currently civil service, you cannot remove civil service protection. So, now subsequently the charter could outline that future appointments would no longer be civil service and then subject to the will of the appointing authority, whether it's a strong mayor or a city manager. But as you, I believe, you are currently constructed, you're a civil service community, and there's a process under the Higher Revised Code that requires discipline to take place for civil servants. So essentially, police and fire are not at will, and then other positions will be articulated in the charter as how they're appointed.
The communities surrounding yours, are they also these council management form of government, or are they
In my
traditional form?
area, there are essentially one, but I'm surrounded by townships that are run by administrators.
And likewise in Hudson, we have Stowe and Cuyahoga Falls have strong mayors. Kent has a city manager form, so it's mixed. Down in Southwest Ohio, it was probably 98% city managers. So it varies in the regions.
Huron's neighbor is Zindroski. They also have a council manager form of government. It's a commission, but they have a professional city manager. And then similar to Rob said, there's a lot of rural townships surrounding us. So Vermillion is a strong mayor form of government. I'm sure if you're familiar with Perkins Township, they have an administrator, but predominantly smaller communities that don't have the manager.
As you know, Cuyahoga County, we have two city manager forms of government, Cleveland Heights and the city of Bedford.
Yeah, so Northeast Ohio does not have as many council manager communities as you'll see in Central Ohio or around the Cincinnati area, for example. In our county, Lake County, Mentor is the largest community, and we are a city manager form of government, and the city of Painesville is as well. About 5 other major cities in Lake County, all of which are mayoral forms of government, some of which have professional administrative officers, some that don't.
Any other questions?
I have one last question. Maybe you could think about North Royalton based on all of your experiences. Anything self-evident that you see from North Royalton that could benefit by city manager? Give you an example. We often talk maybe about expanding tax base and getting more into. We don't have much industry in North Royalton, but do you see anything from North Royalton would benefit?
So, of all the people up here, I'm probably the one that's lived closest to North Royalton. So, I lived in Strongsville for 10 years. So, I think where you could benefit from someone with an experience like any one of the people sitting here, you all are on a regional system for dispatch currently. You're working towards regional fire, whether you know that or not. You have automatic aid with Strongsville and surrounding communities. where a professional helps benefit the community is through the analysis and the ability to professionally digest policy that the council wants to drive, and that would be saving money through regionalism, et cetera. North Royalton, all communities can benefit from a professional administrator that can do that. I don't know that a professional administrator would be able to wave the magic wand for economic development because of your limited highway access. You're tucked away from 71 and 77, the turnpike law that runs through your community. You have no points of egress from the turnpike. So to say a professional administrator could come in and wave a wand and make it, economic development happen, that it would be a disservice to anybody.
Okay. So I'm not going to sit here and tell North Royalton anything about itself or what you need to do, but I will say this, and I think Andy made a good point earlier, which is that, and I think that there was a question, well, what's happening in Cleveland Heights? And his point was that there are certain fundamental issues in communities that take time to overcome or to change, just simply change. It may not be bad things, it may just be this community has a little different vision, and that vision is being expressed by its elected city council. It's our job to put that into practice. So one of the important things is, if you want your community, let's say economic development is important for you. I wanted to comment on this because that's a very important vision for the city of Mentor. Our major slogan is Mentor means business. And so our council has made that very clear. And a lot of what I do and my staff does is promoting economic development as one of our highest, if not our highest priority after public safety. That takes concerted effort over time. It doesn't happen overnight. But the point of this council manager form of government is that you give somebody the opportunity to see that process through over time. Again, I can't emphasize enough that this form of government emphasizes long-term goal setting, long-term planning, and implementing steps along the way to reach that common goal. Our community is one of the largest manufacturers in Ohio. We also have one of the largest retail sectors in Ohio. That isn't by accident, because we have emphasized that. Some communities will emphasize just the opposite. We don't want to see development. We want to stay we like the feel of the community. We like it to be more. Gee, I didn't think it was that bad. You had to turn the lights on. But it's what that community vision is. Our job is to implement that. But again, the benefit is you put a professional staff in place that can work on that over time. And they're not limited to one term, or they're not limited to bringing together the resources, human and otherwise, to make that happen. You used a suggestion about maybe transportation access being a limiting factor. Again, if you're going to improve access to a community, we all know those things don't happen overnight. You're subject to not just the dollars it takes to do that, but the planning issues. Maybe you have a council of government that is involved in that, state issues. One of the things that was asked earlier, we didn't mention this, what is the role of the mayor? It isn't just ceremonial, although that ceremonial position is important, because that mayor is often the face of the community. If someone is interested in the community, they're more likely to walk into the mayor's office and say, Mayor, I'm thinking about investing here. Who do I talk to, or what can you do for me? That mayor is there to receive those inquiries. That mayor is there to transmit that information and work on what that community vision is with council, and it's the manager's job to get it done. Another important role for the mayor is to bring together political resources. So the mayors are going to oftentimes be very closely connected through maybe party affiliations or just tenure and experience with state officials, with federal officials, congressmen, congresswomen. all who are going to be important to bringing political influence to bear in bringing resources to that community. You want to put a highway through your community if that's feasible, whether it's here or wherever. You're not going to do that just with your own local efforts. You're going to have to bring together partners, and that's why it's extraordinarily important for those political elected persons to work very closely with those who are going to try to get the plan put into place and have the time to do that, which can take a decade.
I think one of the big opportunities for any community thinking of transitioning to the council manager form, and this could happen with the new administration as well, but having a professional with common experience in different parts of the country, different parts of the state, to come in and appraise the operation and to work with staff and the department heads to respond back to the council in terms of what may be considered for legislative priority. I think so often in politics, and you see it all over the country right now, we fall into two buckets, one or the other. And I think at the local level, one of my favorite things about this profession is that almost on a daily basis, I think we get to interact with someone and affect change or give them information. You know, if you want to have a question answered about the highway, good luck getting through the Department of Transportation and the governor's office, but every day, it could be something as simple as a question you might catch in the parking lot about a water bill. You're able to have that conversation. And I think going to this form of government brings a lot of that common experience that maybe not specific to this community, but we all deal with the relative pocket of issues. They may be bigger or smaller in communities, but I think you have a real opportunity to get a new perspective. And then also, some of the challenges that I've seen in the strong mayor form is that you have two separate sovereign legislative bodies. You have the office of mayor and you have the legislative body, and when they don't coordinate and they don't work well, you can have stagnation. In the council manager form in Huron, we have a 7-member legislative body, and it's Robert's Rules of Order. When there's a decision that's made on policy, whether it's 5-2, 6-1, or 4-3, the majority rules, and the next day you begin to work on that priority, and I think that could be a benefit as well.
Can you explain what each of you actually, I mean, I know you're operating in that, but do you have other areas that you control as a department head that's encompassed into your area as a city manager?
I think to one degree or another, everyone up here has the direct reports of the executive departments, so whether it's public safety, economic development, HR, those decisions are discussed at that level through our office. So at least from my experience in Huron, virtually every day you have some interaction with some facet of the organization, and depending on the circumstances, sometimes more than others, but on a typical week in, week out, we're dealing with that. I think the position is more than a full-time job, especially in a smaller community. You're at the grocery store with your kids and you're trying to help somebody figure out how to get the street paved or a street light is out. So I think that's important to consider too, is that in the profession, I think people that do this job do it because they're committed to public service, and that doesn't stop at 5 p.m. It doesn't stop on Saturday or Christmas Eve or whatever. It's constant.
I think one of the things as well about the city manager form of government is you have your policy makers, but you also have your operational level, your management level, where you're always scanning to see where the problems might be or where they may be coming up that they aren't appearing yet, and trying to start figuring out how to deal with that. So as an example, one of the things that I've been doing lately, which is not a policy decision, but is very much affecting very many of our communities, is that we have the baby boomers, we have the millennials. We communicate very differently. Millennials don't tend to come to meetings. they don't like coming to meetings. It used to be we'd be able to put up a public hearing notice and we'd get a room full of people and we'd have a dialogue and hear people's opinions, and then the council would vote and we'd all move on. There are a lot of invisible voices in communities now that are invisible until you're about to implement something, and then they come out and say, well, wait a minute, you haven't heard us. So how do you work together with the growing senior population and the needs there, and then the growing millennial population with the live, work, and play interest in a different type of housing stock, and so on. And oftentimes we're seeing that the people that are the decision makers or that are coming to public meetings are the baby boomers to the senior generation, and they're making decisions for people that will live in the community for the next 10, 20 years who don't have a voice. So those are not necessarily policy things, but they're things that when you look around and see how your community is operating, you also need to bring those types of things to the attention of the policymakers and the community so that you can help find solutions to that before it becomes a very...
Very quickly, we would always have a staff meeting every week, and you would listen to the problems and the challenges of every department head. And the city manager certainly has input, but you allow your directors to think outside the box, make those decisions. I think it was a very, very challenging position. And city manager form of government, my opinion is that it is certainly the way to go.
Yeah, I'll echo that for sure, but I'll also say that, one of the advantages of making this your profession and living in the communities where you work is you listen and you're exposed and you hear everybody all the time. So, we listen to, in our case, I listen to the 7 council members whom I have contact with virtually every day. Listen to the residents, we listen to our department heads, we have a staff meeting every week. It's that, but and all that input is invaluable. Our city, for example, has a public information office that is pretty well staffed for a community our size, and we're very active on social media. So that's both helping us put our message out there, but it's also probably more important to be receiving that public input. One of our jobs then is to synthesize all of this and help bring that information to our elected officials so that they can make better decisions on what they need to do. So if there's a question about a policy matter, one of our jobs is to provide them options for them to consider. What are the potential policy alternatives, and their job to help put that together. It's very difficult for mayors to do that because even a full-time mayor is going to have a lot of the other political considerations, and I think that point was made very well. We're not worried about the politics. That is the job of the elected officials. Our job is to run the city as best as we can in the best manner. So in fact, as I said at the very beginning of this, all of us are bound by a code of ethics to remain neutral. Most of us won't be associated with any one political party. Most of us we will not engage in political campaigns or support one candidate over another. We serve each member of our city councils equally and both passionately and dispassionately.
Any last questions? As we try to wrap up here before the 8 o'clock.
I came in late, so
That's okay.
I missed a couple of things. So do you guys all work together all the time, or are you representative of your area? Because I heard you say regional, and so I was confused by what that meant when it's a regional governing body.
No, we're individual cities.
Okay.
I'd say Ken and I probably see more,
Okay,
I know
so
Andy, I know.
So you aren't a team all the time?
We are not. No. Ken and I are on the OCMA, the Ohio City Managers Association. He's a board member. I'm the chairperson of the Support Professional Committee. So we see each other at least monthly. I know
You've never
others.
met me before.
I know Jane because we work in Summit County, and I've known Andy since 2006.
And so because of that, now that I have that clear in my head, what is the closest city manager or council manager form of government to North Royalton?
Brunswick,
Brunswick is, okay, and then who else nearby?
Bedford, Shaker Heights has an odd form of government. They're more of a chief administrative officer, similar but different. Bedford, Brunswick, Oberlin. Oh, Cleveland Heights, I'm sorry. The elusive Cleveland Heights.
Well, yeah, Cleveland, you guys, Cleveland and Bedford touch, right, community-wise?
We don't. We don't. There's probably 4 communities between us, so we're not close.
I think, did you hear that you can tell her the amount, which you said 50% our city managers about in the southern part of Ohio? I mean, it's a lot more than what you realize. That's city manager style.
Dayton, Cincinnati, and Columbus, that is the prevalent form of government. As you get north of Route 30, it becomes less prevalent. So, but there are hybrid forms, but we're here to represent.
If most of this type of government is in the southern part of the state, can you maybe, is there any attributes why it's more southern versus up here in northeast Ohio? Has it just not come up this far yet? Or what are some of the barriers that's happening here?
I would say it's this way. I would say that trying not to be political, but to be political, the strong mayor form of government is more prevalent in Democratic run areas. The council manager form of government is more of a Republic in a Republican area.
But of course, everything has its potential for.
I just want to add to that. I had some people calling me since I had that ad in the art ad in the paper that, and they know nothing about this. We are really in the blind here. We know nothing of, and if I didn't experience with Andy White out in Huron, my husband and I would have not known anything like this. And you know, my husband was police chief here, so he's dealt with this type of, municipal government. And he even says it's an eye-opener to see what's accomplished, what we've been missing, and we just don't know about it.
Which surprises me because if Brunswick is this type of government, why aren't we aware of it? We're right next door.
I don't know that, but people don't, they've never heard of this. They don't even understand how that exists. So I have to explain it to them, and it's just amazing how people don't really get either, they're just not informed. And I can understand that, because in all honesty, we heard of it, but we didn't realize it until we worked with it. And then we went, wow, this is a whole different way to accomplish things. And it's on a much professional level. That's the big difference. And I like the idea that they brought up, you keep your employees long term. It does make a difference. Every time we move people around, people are moved around. And then we start all over again. So it does make a difference with having a city manager who's not moving out and who's stabilizing your city, if I'm correct.
2 points. One, historically, because we're in this region, when a new mayor is elected, he'll bring his new economic development director. And economic development is relationship-based. I think Ken probably said it best when you develop relationships with those people that are going to build your community. And as you change every so often, I'm not an advocate for term limits. I believe that every 4 years is a term limit at the ballot. When you change direction, it impacts your ability to attract and benefit from a long-term city administration.
Just a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's hard for citizens to stay informed of basic things within their community. Everybody is doing more with less, raising families, having a couple jobs and so on. It's hard for people within your community to know what's going on in your community. much less be a scholar around it. Now, not everybody, but we experience that a lot, that there are people that we've had things in the newspapers, and we've had things on the TVs, and we've had charrettes, and we've had all of these, and then people come to a meeting and say, well, I haven't heard about phase 2 of downtown renovation. We've been working on it for 20 years. So, you know, we all up here are kind of scholars of city manager form of government, and it's important to us and so on, but I'm not a scholar of internal medicine or, you know, a lot of other professions that other people know a lot about. So it doesn't surprise me that much that people aren't really aware of what's going on in their neighborhoods.
And I would also articulate that city managers in and of themselves are not good promoters of their profession. We'll come out and speak to a small group of people at any time, but we're not out advocating for changes. Like if someone contacts us, we'll come and speak. I encourage you, I'm a graduate of Cleveland State University. Dr. Larry Keller is a staunch advocate for city management. He has written a few charters in this region. He would be a great person to articulate why the city council, the city manager form of government is a good choice, or possibly, you know, to review your charter. He'll sit on your charter, help your charter commission. He'll do all that at his love for good public administration.
No. Justin.
Any other questions? Have we worn you guys out? Anything? Well, I'm a teacher, former teacher, we're loud. I just want to say thank you. They all came out on their own. It is not advocating me at all. I asked them to come out to explain to the residents what this is all about. And you have professionals here that are showing you we can be a better North Royalton. We can consider this and we can go in that direction. And I disagree with you about the highway though. We should be capitalizing on the fact we're between two of them. We have access on 2 highways. Why are we not capitalizing on it? I don't understand. So that's my only disagreement with the highways. But anyways, I would like to thank all of them. I applaud them for coming out. I don't know what else to say, but I think this is a route North Royalton should really consider to change the way our services are and things that are going on within the city, put a professional in charge. So I thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.